Welcome to Season 3 of This Is Your Life in Silicon Valley, podcast about the Bay Area, technology, and culture. I'm your host, Sunil Rajaraman, and I'm joined by my co-host, Yasha Kakis-Wolf.
Sunil, do you ever just chit-chat with family members and ask them kind of questions about when they were growing up?
All the time. I mean, everybody has a story in the family, and you definitely know that. Oftentimes they're the most interesting story, but I don't know what they are most of the time.
Me neither. And I absolutely love getting to ask questions about what happened with my family, what happened in previous generations, what happened with this aunt or uncle who I haven't seen forever. I just love the idea of it. I never seem to be able to find enough time.
Well, our guest today, Amelia Lin, is working on a product that solves just that. It's called Saga, and it's really relevant right now during the pandemic when people are trying to document stories. But it helps our older generations record their story and essentially play it back as a podcast format. And it has all sorts of wide-reaching implications, which we get into with Amelia on the podcast, including, could we actually recreate the personality of loved ones through voice?
This sounds like a future sci-fi movie to me. She reminds me, by the way, of like the archetype of Silicon Valley, like forever an optimist, super scrappy, and also a really privileged background with education.
Really enjoyed today's interview. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
It's a beautiful Friday. We're recording this right before a long Memorial Day weekend, which is pretty awesome. Kind of makes you appreciate being in the Bay Area a little bit when the weather is like this.
Oh, totally. I totally have friends on the East Coast too. I think it snowed in New York like only a couple weeks ago, and you realize how spoiled you are being out here.
You're like, no thanks. Are you a Bay Area person? Is this normal for you?
Oh, yeah, no, I'm not a Bay Area native. I am a transplant, like most people here. So I am actually from Texas originally. So I grew up in like baking hot heat. That's where my family is still. And
is baking hot heat a city? Baking hot heat, the city in Texas? Where in Texas? Baking hot.
There's like a little suburb called Plano outside of Dallas. Yeah, so I grew up in a place that was very hot. Then I went to school in Boston, Cambridge, I guess specifically. So then it was like very, very cold, at least to me, as a Texas native. And then so I feel like, I did like the Goldilocks thing. I went from like really hot to really cold. And then I moved to the Bay Area and I was like, this is just right. I'm just going to stay here and never leave.
So the Bay Area was just right. But Boston. Let's talk about Boston for a second. You are your first guest to ever be double Harvard. And so Harvard undergrad, Harvard graduate school. I know that we're going to talk a lot about Saga, which is your very, very interesting company, which we talked about a little bit in the intro. But tell us about education right now, because I'm giving you a little bit of a hard time. But where is all this headed? Because we're in the midst of this global pandemic. And we're hearing a lot of narratives about education. What's your quick take?
Right. So I'm a little biased because before I worked on Saga, I worked at Udacity. So online education, ed tech. And I'm a huge believer in just how much promise I really think there is for new ways of learning. And the second reason I'm biased is because I myself, I'm a beneficiary of that. So a lot of the stuff that I ended up picking over the years, a lot of the coding that I know is self-taught. And I mean, I don't know if we'll get to it later, but like in business school and undergrad, like I was like just kind of picking stuff up like for fun online. And a lot of that is what I credit, breaking into product with, because I didn't start out in tech at all. Actually, I had a very, very different career before. And so I really lived through that path, of online education, unlocking new career paths. Even though I wasn't coming from a super traditional path. And so I'm actually very optimistic that during this time, people will become more open-minded, both as students and also as recruiters, about where people can be picking up skills. And I'm actually really excited about that.
We're recording this the day after the UC system just announced that they're no longer going to consider the SAT and the ACT in admissions, which is pretty interesting. I mean, I'd love to hear. Yeah, what are your quick thoughts? Riff on that for us.
I used to be in my summers a professional SAT tutor. It was one of the ways I made money over the summer. So I actually took the SAT. I was weirdly young, super young. This is like such a weird fact. It's probably one of the weirdest random facts about myself. But I actually took the SAT when I was in 7th grade. That was
Who doesn't, though?
SAT.
Everybody does that.
Is there who did that?
No.
Okay.
Nobody does that.
I don't know. Yeah, so I took the SAT in 7th grade, and I actually scored well enough on it that I became a SAT tutor in my free time as a 8th grader. So I would like tutor like high schoolers, which is super awkward. But it was really great money. I mean, you can imagine, like, you know, as a kid, it's like, so I was charging like $50 an hour, which is, yeah, that's pretty good money as a kid. Anyway, and so, yeah, I'm such a believer that the SAT is just entirely trainable. I mean, that was totally my experience. I learned how to take the test. And there's also all these studies that show that the correlation between, even though the SAT is meant to be an equalizer for economic opportunity, in truth, it's actually more strongly correlated now with income than GPA. And because who are the people who are like, you know, like paying me as a tutor?
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's really fascinating. Yeah. It's like people who have the money to afford the prep courses.
Exactly, right? They hire me, and I would teach how to take the SAT. So yeah, I'm actually a fan of that. Even though, of course, I'm like, my past self would be sad because it's a great source of income.
Well, how do you think about being double Harvard and the benefits of being in a location, in a community, kind of first, and then being able to expand out into developing new skills, which, by the way, I'm an enormous fan of, like the idea that you can find kind of spot training or support to build a completely new set of capabilities and do that entirely remotely. Like, do you think that in the future we still need to have that, the kind of benefit of being in a community like you had over the course of several years?
You know, when my 4 years at undergrad at Harvard are they're honestly like the fondest memory. Those years are the fondest memories of my life. But when I think about, you know, why is that? I mean, for me, I was a huge nerd in high school. I was one of those kids who actually really loved school. You know, I was like, oh, it's like so fun. I'm like gonna go, like hang out with all my friends, like take my classes. Like, I'm sure that was, you know, whatever. I was not one of those kids who's like, school's boring. But you know, the reason why. And so I was super excited about all the kind of opportunities to learn things. But of course, the reason why those 4 years are some of the best memories of my life is because I met my best friends there, right? It's the people. So, you know, I think if you're going to look at what is the value that you get from that in-person experience, it's literally that I like lived with, you know, these 4 girls for like so many years, and they've become like my absolute best friends. And we've all been like bridesmaids and, you know, for each other and all of that. And so, you know, I think that if you're gonna go do like the in-person experience, like, that's super valuable. And I would say the same thing for business school. Like, the most valuable thing that came out of business school was meeting people and the relationships, like really more than like, frankly, I think like.
Well, I completely agree with that. And so, you know, turning that back full circle, what do you? I mean, I had the same experience in college. Josh and I both went to small liberal arts colleges, but you have that core group of 3 or 4 people, and then business school as well, where, you know, they are lifelong friends. And, you know, college and business school is really the only time in your life, or whatever schools you go to professionally, where you're around people the same age, confined in the same space, forced to push your own thoughts and opinions and, you know, forward your thinking. And to me, that just seems difficult to recreate through a Udacity or a Udemy or a Coursera. And, you know, this will be the last thought on education, I promise. I want to talk a lot about Saga, but What are your thoughts on that? Is it possible to recreate that without the in-person experience, or what? And even with remote work, for that matter.
I think it is, and the reason I say that is because I know somebody firsthand who has lived through this. But it's definitely more difficult, and I think that that's one of the biggest things that you see ed tech companies doing, working on, really thinking very hard about in these last few years, is how you recreate that community. But for example, so one of the things that I have always thought was so striking, so my boyfriend. He is really into open source. So he's an engineer, and he loves working on open source in his free time. And literally his best friends, and I remember when we were first dating, and we've been together for many years. So I'm calling him my boyfriend. He's really more a partner, but I remember when we first met, I was so surprised, and I realized that his best friend, literally the dude who he was this would be my groomsman, was this guy who they, didn't meet in person for years. And the more that I kind of learned about him and his closest friends, they're people from all over the world. They're people who he's basically met through working together on open source projects, and they are legit his best friends. And they just have this super close bond. And that to me is incredible. They didn't have any kind of fancy coursework or anything. They just literally were all working together on the same projects and built this incredible bond together. So I have seen through his experience that this is possible. I mean, these are the people, who will come to the wedding one day. It's going to be these guys. But it's definitely harder. Yeah. And I've lived through that too, having taken online courses, that it can be very isolating. Right. Yeah. And so that has to be designed in.
It's kind of funny. I have 3 kids, and they've not been physically in school. They've been doing distance learning over the course of the last couple of months. And we're now to a point where we've got kind of agreements with a handful of families that we all are comfortable with kind of how everybody is kind of managing themselves. And so we're putting together opportunities for our kids to see each other. And what's happening now is that when one of the kids comes over to our house, or our kid goes over to one of their houses, the first thing that happens for the first 45 minutes is that it's just excruciatingly, agonizingly awkwardness. and the social skills, the interactions are not working particularly well out of the gate. So maybe it'll be funny where you can develop all these kind of online community relationships, and then school is going to be all about how do you actually have a conversation with somebody in real life and interact with them.
It's so true. It's a new way of communicating. But what's funny? Okay, so there's this great book that I read once that was basically it was the history of communication. It was really really interesting, but it was basically the history of communication. I have to find the title, and they one of the things I remember from this book was they showed these first telephone calls that people would make. And it was the advent of the telephone, and people would literally on the telephone call be "Dear so-and-so, blah, 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 blah. Sincerely," or whatever, right? It was almost people didn't know how to have phone calls. They would use it like a letter, because they're oh, I know how to write a letter, so that's what I'm going to do. And it's just it's so funny. It's whatever. Humanity just had to adapt again and again and again over time to new forms of communication. And I'm sure we'll do it again. It'll be fine.
I think you're probably right. So Neil and I are still trying to adapt to not being in the same room and talking over each other. But the way we're training ourselves is by keeping a jar of money in front of us. And every time we talk over each other, we pay $1 in. Sunil's up to $6,000. I'm up to 12. We're working on it though. It's going to get better, right, Sunil?
We're working on it. I want to get into Saga and the whole notion of narrative, and I have a bunch of lines of questioning on this. So I'm gonna forewarn you, Amelia. But first, just explain Saga, explain how it started, and what you want to do with it. Because my first reaction is this is a product we can all use. It's great, and documenting history is really, really important to me and to Yasha. That's why we do the podcast. But where are you going with it, and what is it?
Yeah. So Saga, we're an app, and we help families save life stories of loved ones on voice audio. So We actually, the way that we describe it sometimes is it's a lot like getting a podcast of your grandma's childhood stories. So in podcast language. And the way that it started was it started as actually a personal project for my own parents. So I had been actually begging my mom and dad for many, many years to find some way of saving these stories for me. They used to tell me and my sister when we were growing up as kids about their lives growing up during the Chinese Cultural Revolution. It was such a different world and a different time. And even as a kid, I was like kind of fascinated by some of these things that they would share. They're just so alien. But I think as I grew older, those things became even more meaningful and more precious, and you would start to appreciate them more and more. And I really started feeling like, first of all, I want my kids to hear these stories. Like I want them to understand, like, you know, what the grandparents, like, you know, kind of went through, where they came from. But it also felt really important to me that it not be from me, that it be from their voice. I really felt like, you know, it's not going to be nearly as effective if I say, did you know your dad lived through this? Or, sorry, did you know that grandpa lived through this and grandma lived through this? And, you know, it just wasn't going to be as powerful as actually hearing it from the person who lived through it. And so I'd always bring this up to my mom and dad. And I mean, they could tell you, I've said it so many times over the years, like, you know, would you write a book about yourselves? Or, you know, I wish we could make like a documentary about you guys or something. And they'd always say, that's very, very sweet, Amelia. We're super flattered. It sounds really cool. Maybe when we retire someday, because writing a book sounds like a huge undertaking.
Right.
And so it always just felt like this really big project that would maybe happen someday. But I really felt like I really got to get this stuff saved. I really wanted to make it. So I wanted to find a way to make it easy. I wanted to find a way that made it hopefully fun for them and not feel like this big, laborious, nebulous chore. And it was important to me that it'd be something that we could do even if I was in California and my family's in Texas. So, yeah. And all of those things basically kind of led me to, I said, look, Mom, Dad, like, I really, you know, I've always wanted to try to get your story saved. Would you let me experiment on you? Like, I'm just going to try a bunch of different things on you, and will you be my experiment subjects? And, you know, at worst, I'll finally get the story saved that I've always wanted anyway. At least I'll get them saved in some form. And, like, you know, but maybe we'll find something along the way that would make it, like, easier for other families to do this. Right. Yeah. If you want to, I can do a real quick recap of just like, well, how does the product actually work?
So this is a really fascinating idea. And I guess I kind of giggle because you were talking a little bit about how the book that you read and the story around, like, using the telephone at the beginning, nobody knew how to use it. You found the same thing, I'd imagine, right? But as soon as you start to ask people to tell stories, that nobody knows how to do that, right? Or do you think that's pretty intuitive? Like, is it easy for people to tell stories, especially in an environment like the way that you've set up?
So, yeah, we definitely had to, we learned by doing it ourselves. I remember I started out literally by just like calling people and like interviewing them. So kind of as soon as I started sharing this idea, I had like friends and coworkers say, that's really interesting. I'd actually love that for my grandma, you know, or my dad, or, you know, would you, can you test with them? Yeah. And at the beginning, I had no idea how we were going to do this. And I would literally just be like, I'd schedule a time and I'd call them and I'd just like ask them about their lives. And so one of the things that we figured out pretty quickly early on was that the prompts were very important. That people do have a hard time with just like coming up off the cuff with something which makes total sense. And I'm sure it's no surprise to you all as podcast hosts. And when we started to say, hey, we have some like suggested topics and suggested questions, people would say, oh, thank you. That's really helpful. Like, I really like that. Got it.
Yeah. What's the best question to ask a person to get them to tell a story about their life?
Oh, there are some really good ones. So I definitely have some personal favorites. So we have hundreds now in our question bank, but I definitely have a couple that I'm partial to. So some of them are lighter and some are serious. One of the lighter ones that I like a lot is tell me about the biggest trouble you ever got into when you were a kid, because it often elicits things that often actually a lot of people sometimes will be like, I've never heard that. I never heard that story from my grandma. And it can be like really hilarious and kind of humanizing. One of the more serious ones that I really love is what went through your mind the first time you saw your child. And that one gets people, including myself, when I heard this response from my own dad, crying, because it is just so incredible. I think it becomes even more powerful when you have become a parent yourself to hear that.
Where do you go with this product? Are you trying to replace all podcasters? Just automate us all?
It's so funny because we actually did not start out even realizing that there was this analogy to podcasts. Literally, we were just like, hey, we're going to record stories. We tried tons of different formats. We tried people writing questions. We tried video. We tried all sorts of stuff. And after we decided, hey, there's something really powerful but simple about voice that we like, we started doing that. And then a couple of families started writing back to us and saying, do you think I could send these episodes to my podcast player? And that was that sort of weird aha moment for we're like, wow, that's so true. This is very podcast-like. So the way that it works is that we send these question prompts weekly, and they're things like hey, tell me about the biggest trouble you got into your kid. These things are meant to prompt memories. People record their answers, and then it gets shared to the family. And it's kind of like, hey, here's the latest podcast episode, right? So we actually didn't realize the podcast connection until our own users pointed it out. But the bigger vision for us, I think that for us, it really has been about creating a space for deeper and more meaningful connections with the people who you're closest to. And it's so ironic because in a lot of ways, what we're kind of creating is it's this private space for your family, but it's very different from any other kind of social network you could really imagine. It's very intimate. It's sort of default private. People will sometimes share very long stories. We've had recordings that are over an hour.
Yeah.
That's very unlike, 140 characters. And so I think for us, the thing that really drives us and motivates and sort of our big dream is that you come out of the other end of listening to one of these stories feeling like something deeper and have a deeper connection than you did before. Maybe learn something you never knew about someone you really care about.
So Amelia, I have to ask you, because Yasha did joke about it, but I actually had half a thought in my head about this. I've been watching too much Westworld, maybe. But is part of the product vision to, capture the essence of what people are so that we can live on with them and, I don't know, in some sort of AI way, recreate their voice and the way their manner of speaking. There have been all sorts of, sci-fi things about this before, but has that crossed your mind?
It's totally come up. One of our earliest users, she was a really sweet woman in Omaha who had found our site. And I remember I was on the phone call with her, and she's in her 60s, and she was actually wanting to buy and use our product for her mother-in-law. And I remember asking her, I said, so what got you interested? I'm always curious, as a founder and as a creator of product, you're always like, what got you interested in this? Why are you trying this out? And she said, well, I've always imagined that there's someday going to be, an AI cloud of all of our beings. And I'm listening to this woman, kind of going this super techie vision of the future. And it's wow, she's got it all figured out. She was one of our earliest users, and I wasn't expecting that answer. So it's definitely come up. I think whether the implementation is literally as sort of a techie afterlife. It's certainly there in the genesis of the idea, even from the beginning. Literally the reason why I wanted to do this for my parents is it was kind of as a way of honoring them. I just I just don't want these things to be lost. And I just wanted to, as much of that essence to kind of be something that would always be there for our family. And not even just for my kids one day, but hopefully for their kids and their kids and their kids and their kids. And that was like in my mind from the very beginning. So this sense of like a legacy that lives on, that feels really authentically you, was very important, I think, even from the beginning.
That makes sense. I have to ask, I mean, just because it's also topical, the audio industry, we're talking about podcasts, we're on a podcast. I'm sure you follow some podcast news, but we're also recording this on a week where Joe Rogan, who is, you know, the most popular podcaster on the planet, his show gets 190 million downloads per month. Spotify has just basically announced a deal to effectively take him exclusive after announcing deals with Bill Simmons and the Ringer folks and Gimlet Media. You know, where is audio headed? I'm kind of scared of this situation where, you know, we're walled off making choices between Spotify, Apple Podcasts, et cetera. Where does this format go, both from a business perspective and just an interest perspective, in your opinion, after all this activity?
You know, I'm a little bit more hopeful. I think I'm more optimistic about it. I think the way that I see it is that I think people are starting to really understand and appreciate the potential of voice as a medium. And with that is going to come a lot of experimentation of different formats. And I do think that, you know, I mean, I think some of those are going to be things that, you know, we're fans of, and some of them aren't. And some of them are going to be like new and crazy things that we come up with that nobody ever thought of. I kind of think of like, I don't know. I think back to, would anybody have ever thought that there was going to be a whole genre of YouTube videos that were just people reacting to things that they saw? You know, I just think there's going to be so much invention. And so I don't know. I'm a little bit more optimistic about sort of like, yes, there is change, but I think there's going to be good that comes with it too. Certainly, like one of the things that I always had thought about from my end, and you know, you guys probably have thoughts on this too. One of the reasons why we started Saga was because like we think there's so many stories from people who might never otherwise get that chance to share that story, right? And it's like, well, you know, maybe it doesn't really matter whether you know somebody who makes a podcast or whether your story, you know, has to be like compelling to the largest audience possible. If it's super, super important and meaningful to a few people that you really care about and they really want to hear your story, what? Why wouldn't you? If you told me 5 years ago we were all going to spending hours listening to strangers talking from our phones, that would have sounded super bizarre, like super, super bizarre. But that's like basically what we do. And so it's like, well, if you're spending all that time listening to people you don't even know, imagine if those were people you actually like care, like your friends, your family, people you know and love. Like that would be fascinating.
I thought you were talking about Clubhouse.
Yeah,
So I am really interested in last question I have around this is just audio in general. And so, you know, podcast is one way that we take up people's time and, you know, pretty interesting. I mean, the thing I like about it as opposed to, you know, the written word is we get so distracted so easily. I'll be looking at a book and then looking up at Netflix at the same time, and it's impossible to focus. Your eyes just betray you. Whereas with ears, you can't, just by definition, you can't really easily divert attention, and it requires a certain amount of focus. And so I'm bullish on the format. Where I'm going with this is, you know, how much that's a blessing and a curse for platforms like yours, which is, how do you spend that time listening? And, you know, where do you see this going is my question really with audio. Are we going to spend a lot of time on listening to stories and, or is it going to be podcasting, or is it going to be Clubhouse, or what's your version of how audio plays out as a format?
I think it's going to be all of the above. I'm sitting here with AirPods in my ears, and literally I don't think there's probably been more than an hour since this morning where I didn't have at least one AirPod in one ear. Like these basically live in my ears now. And, you know, that wasn't always the case. Right. So, I mean, even apart from things like podcasts, just the fact that like wireless earbuds are like a thing, or earphones, or like we're just spending more time like listening to audio. I think it makes the pie bigger for everyone. So there's a lot of ways to spend 24 hours in a day. And so I'm actually I'm of the opinion that like all of the above is going to happen. And that's like totally fine.
So we have one question that we always wrap up on. And
there you go. We did it. We did the talk over each other thing though. We did the
$2.
Acknowledge that we did the talk over each other thing.
$2, just $2. That's all. It's fine. That's not. It didn't even make a dent in the cash jar. We ask one question to every guest of the podcast, so I want to set you up with that, and then maybe we'll chat a little bit more, and then you can answer the question for our listeners. You spend time on social media? I asked that as a question and looked at you in Zoom with an eyebrow, like maybe it's not a question. Do you spend time on social media?
You know what? I actually don't spend a ton of time on social media. It's never really come naturally to me.
You do read a lot, though, sounds like.
I do. Cool. I do read quite a bit, yes. Right. Well, a little bit less than I would like. In the last few months, as we've gotten pretty busy, but normally I read quite a lot.
Well, we're going to adapt the question a little bit. So first part of the question is, on the social networks that you do spend time on, maybe you drift onto Twitter every once in a while, or Instagram or something like that, a recommended follow for the listeners. So that's kind of part question one. Second part of the question is, what's the book that you've read most recently that you remember and want to recommend to the listeners as well? So those are the two parts of the question. As you're thinking about it, this conversation has been interesting, and I think kind of exciting as we talk about audio as a format. Sunil, you were talking about how there might be a question of whether it is a bunch of stories or platforms where you can listen to different people that we evolve into. I tend to think that it's really important to have great questions to kick off anything that's interesting in audio. Great questions oftentimes lead to books, which become, audible, which turns into a set of questions that are in a podcast. I think that's particularly important. And I'm really curious how you think about the prompts that become the best questions for you. Are you thinking about them with an idea that it's a human that's going to be the prompt? Do you care about the human intervention as the prompt? Or do you think that you can ask questions and do that through text messages or emails? Like how do you think about prompting a question with someone to get a great story from them?
I think that's such a good question. And I think it's one that we're also always thinking about for Saga. So, well, honestly, at the beginning, a lot of the inspiration came from our earliest users. So we would just kind of pay a lot of attention to what they were saying. Was like, oh my gosh, my mom recorded this amazing story about, this childhood story about how she had this nickname, and it all stemmed from, this one thing that happened. And so we would get kind of inspiration from them. You're like, oh, that's kind of an interesting one. Like, we could maybe start that as, what were some of the nicknames you had as a kid? How did you get them? And that kind of ends up being an opening to like a much larger story. So we actually got a lot of inspiration from people kind of telling us like what was really eye-opening for them or meaningful for them. I also think that because for us right now, we ask text questions, mm-hmm. we try to be really thoughtful about how it's phrased, because it's so important. And I'm sure you experience this all the time on the podcast, that it needs to be specific enough that somebody can grab onto it, but open-ended enough that you don't get just like a yes, no answer or a factual answer, but it actually unfurls into a memory or a story. And so we'll sometimes even build in sort of these natural follow-ups that say like, well, tell me a fact. Okay, now tell me like, why? Tell me more about that or whatever. And you're kind of like encouraging the person to open up. Certainly another thing that we also see is people just writing custom questions. And so that is extremely powerful, actually hearing from someone about, this is a specific thing that I love this story you always tell. Like, please tell me that story, about the chicken farm or whatever.
When you're when you're ready for interviewers, Sunil and I would be very happy to lend our voices. I just volunteered you, Sunil.
That would be so cool. That would be so cool. And it's potential future partnership. Some of our storytellers, they just have them. I think I've always believed this, but I think Saga makes me feel even more that I think everybody has an interesting story to tell. Some of just the crazy experiences and histories and just the variation of them that come out from people on the platform, with people who were like international opera singers and like skied to the North Pole, or grew up as like a child movie star. There's incredible experiences, and some of them have expressed like wanting to share their stories maybe more broadly. So if you're looking for guests someday, we got some really interesting storytellers.
Everybody has a great story. So let's hit those social media follows that you'd recommend first, and then maybe a book recommendation second.
This one was so hard for me. I feel like it's some sort of sign with Saga that so much of my interaction does tend to be these private things. Okay, so am I allowed to? Can I share a podcast? Is that too competitive? Can I share a podcast that I like?
I think that's fair, Sunil. That totally works, right?
Does that work?
That's totally fine. It'll be a first.
Okay. So I recently learned about a really cool podcast. So called Code Story, and so the reason why I like it is because this is such a stereotype. I'm a huge fan of how I built this. I mean, whatever, of course. Like everybody loves, all the founders love listening to how I built this. I find it so inspirational. I just love it. And what I like about Code Story is that they tried to take the same format of tell me about the story of creating something and building something, but they interview the technical co-founder or founder. And so what I love about that is that I think it takes this perspective that often kind of gets lost, honestly. So my co-founder, Andrew, he's the one who got interviewed he actually got interviewed on Code Story, which is so cool. For me, I'm the one who gets to have all these cool conversations with you guys. I love, telling the story of how we started and all of that. And I feel like it's not often that kind of sometimes the builder, Andrew's slaving away 24/7, while we were, building this app, kind of gets that recognition and gets to tell their side of the story. And so I love it. It's just this, it's a great seed idea, but with this cool twist on it and very Silicon Valley.
Oh, dig it. How about the most recent book?
Oh yeah. Okay. So this one's gonna totally, I feel like this is you're gonna be like, oh, that makes so much sense, with Saga. But I read this great book, Unfollow, and it's a memoir by Megan Phelps Roper. And so she actually was a member of the Westboro Baptist Church. And the book is about so she actually grew up in the family, and she basically tells the story of what that was like, why it made total sense to her growing up. And, so Westboro Baptist Church, is, you guys probably know, is kind of a notorious religious group. And it's sometimes famously called sort of, the most hated group in America. And she gives this totally different perspective of when this is what you've grown up in, why it made sense to her at the time. And she actually ended up leaving at about age 28, and sort of what that journey was like for her to get to that point, what it did to her worldview to completely change, everything that she'd believed in before, and what that was like for her to separate from a group that not only was sort of her religious group, but was literally her family. And so it's a really, really fascinating story and memoir, and I think is just it's extremely well written. It's very, very well written, and I think is just very. It really is very eye-opening about just how human everybody is, no matter what side of the fence they are.
Awesome. Thank you for the recommendation,
Amelia. Yeah, this has been great. We are excited to share Saga with our listeners. it's kind of meta doing a podcast about an audio company, but it seems really great. It seems like something everybody should use during the pandemic, particularly like now we're introspecting. Thanks for joining us today. And Yasha, you got anything else you wanna share before I ramble myself into oblivion here?
I was gonna try and talk over you and just drop an extra $1. Amelia's been throwing cash at you on Zoom the whole time, though, so we're ready. This is great. I appreciate the time today.
Thanks so much.
So, Sunil, do you think we're on our path to be replaced as podcast hosts by some app?
Pretty soon we'll be, someone may be taking all of our interviews right now and creating AIs of us, which would be the most predictable thing in the world to create.
Right? Let me ask some questions about where you're from. Okay, done. Check. We got it. I enjoyed today's episode. I'm pretty intrigued by this app, and I'm not usually excited about apps to try out, but this one I kind of am.
Yeah, definitely gonna. I've already made my first Saga referral, and so hopefully people adopt this widely, and I hope we don't lose stories from our wonderful people right now, and I hope you use Saga.
And I think that we promised that we'd be the first official voices, instead of text prompts. So, if you happen to use Saga out sometime in the next several months, maybe hear one of the two of our voices asking you questions about your past. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Tune in for the next one. Thanks for listening to This Is Your Life in Silicon Valley. If you enjoyed listening to this podcast as much as Sunil and I enjoyed recording it, please go back to the application you found this podcast on, rank us 5 stars, leave us a comment. We read every single one. Thanks for listening to This Is Your Life in Silicon Valley.